Today is July 17th. I really love Tom Evans. I'm going to make a catalog as many days as I have left in this market because I can't catch them up the East Coast. Long Island, I wasn't able to get them. But I did think about them. July 17th, my father passed away this week. His 80th birthday is going to be in August. And in antiquity, the son, the first son, the first begotten son, Jesus, I'm going to say that my mother made a household with Charlie Chisholm. Her name is Carolyn Polite Chisholm. Why would anybody believe I was Robert Jenkins' son? Because he lives in the house down there on Cannon Street. Charlie and Carolyn. So I was my father's son. He really impacted my life far beyond the windfall that he left me. That's him, not my mother. My mother is a whore. That's Babylon.
Broadcasting to the glory of God, this is WYFH North Charleston. With SRN News, I'm Keith Peters in Washington. Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker says a ban
This
on
is the only
carrying
thing I don't
guns
really
in
like
military
about
recruiting centers should be eliminated. The Republican
family radio is
presidential
that they put
candidate
this
made the
news
comments
on
during a campaign event in Iowa
man-made,
when asked about the
satanic-made.
recent murders of 4 Marines in Chattanooga,
Take the meat
Tennessee.
and
General
leave
Ray
the
Odierno,
bones.
the Army Chief of Staff, says there will always be some vulnerability at recruiting stations because they have to be open to the public.
We are out there with the population, and that's where we have to be. We can't separate ourselves as we continue to recruit and interact with the population.
Meanwhile, an Ohio company says the man who gunned down 4 Marines in Tennessee failed a background check in May 2013. First Energy Corporation says Mohammed Abdulaziz was conditionally hired as an engineer at a nuclear plant in East Cleveland. He spent 10 days there before he was let go because he failed a background check. The company would not say why he didn't pass the screening process. Also at SRNnews.com, President Obama has met with Saudi Arabia's foreign minister to discuss the Iran deal.
Saudi Arabia is among the
part I
Gulf
don't really
nations
like,
wary of the nuclear
it'll be
accord
worth
with
it. It'll be a
Iran.
nice
White House
upload. I
spokesman
got a
John
lot of
Chernis
videos
says
to
the Oval
upload.
Office meeting between the president and the Saudi
A lot
foreign
of things to
minister
do.
came
Packing,
about after
gotta
Mr.
pack.
Obama's phone call with the King of
Getting
Saudi
ready to move
Arabia
to New
earlier in
Jersey.
the week.
This is a meeting that King Salman requested the president host.
Ernest says the meeting focused on regional security. He would not say if the Saudis support the controversial deal with Iran. Greg Clugston, SRN News, the White House.
A House committee is asking for a briefing from the Planned Parenthood official who was secretly recorded discussing how her organization obtains tissue from aborted babies for research. The House Energy and Commerce Committee wants Dr. Deborah Nucatella to brief committee aides this month. The letter said they wanted her to explain the group's standards for the collection and sale of fetal tissue. This is SRN News.
We invite you to memorize our Good News memory verse for this week, Acts 16, verse 31. And they said, Believe on the Lord Jesus Christ, and thou shalt be saved, and thy house. Acts 16, verse 31. Our Good News memory verse for this week.
Cleanse me with hyssop, and I will be clean. Wash me, and I will be whiter than snow. Psalm 51, verse 7.
Our hymn today on Musical Backgrounds, Whiter Than Snow, written by James Nicholson.
Him when he sees us meeting other people around.
Soul that sinneth, it shall die. Now, if we go back to Genesis, the first book in the Bible, in Genesis, God laid this principle out, laid out this warning in the beginning, very close to the beginning of creation. And God formed man, he commanded man, gave man certain commandments, and he said in Genesis 2, verse 16, "And Jehovah, or the Lord God, commanded man, saying, Of every tree of the garden thou mayest freely eat, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil thou shalt not eat of it, for in the day that thou eatest thereof thou shalt surely die." And they did die that day, and yet Adam lived to be 930 years. So the day that they ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, they died, and something died within them. And God speaks of, in the book of Revelation, God talks about the second death. And so you start wondering, okay, what does that mean, the second death? If there's a second death, that means that there is the first death. Well, what is the first and what is the second death? The first death is spiritual in nature. The first death is where Adam's and Eve's and all of mankind's eyes were closed, and we died spiritually, and we lost our ability to actually understand. And let me just go back to, let's look at Matthew chapter 13, verse 9. This is Matthew 13, verse 9. "Who hath ears to hear, let him hear. And the disciples came and said unto him, Why speakest thou unto them in parables? And he answered and said unto them, Because it is given unto you to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it is not given. For whosoever hath, to him shall be given, and he shall have more abundance. But whosoever hath not, from him shall be taken away even that he hath. Therefore speak I unto them in parables, because they seeing see not, and hearing they hear not, neither do they understand. And in them is fulfilled the prophecy of Isaiah, which saith, By hearing ye shall hear, and shall not understand, and seeing ye shall see, and shall not perceive. For this people's heart is waxed gross, and their ears are dull of hearing, and their eyes they have closed, lest at any time they should see with their eyes, and hear with their ears, and should understand with their heart, and should be converted, and I should heal them. But blessed are your eyes, for they see, and your ears, for they hear." Now this is something that we should kind of take notice of and stop for a moment. And Jesus is saying that the disciples in whom were born again, those disciples that became born again, their ears were opened, their eyes were opened. Prior to their eyes and ears being opened, they were like everyone else, all of mankind, whose heart is waxed gross, whose ears are dull of hearing, whose eyes have been closed. And this is a result of what happened in the first death. Our eyes closed, our spiritual ears were closed, our heart became wax gross with sin. And that's why God says of man's natural heart, the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who could know it? Our own heart, our own natural heart is so deceitful, it is deceitful above all things. Deceitful above all things. So now, wow, if we stop and consider that, in our natural state, we do not have the ability to even understand the depth of the darkness of our own hearts. So our hearts will deceive us. They can't. It's not that they can't. They will deceive us. And we will believe a lie. And so if God sends strong delusion that we believe a lie and our hearts are deceitful above all things, And if the cares of this world and the deceitfulness of riches blind our eyes in this world, and if we are in God, in fact, Jesus said, how great is that darkness. Let me just read Matthew chapter 6, and I'm going to start with verse 22. The light of the body is the eye. If therefore thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be full of light. But if thine eye be evil, thy whole body shall be full of darkness. If therefore the light that is in thee be darkness, how great is that darkness? What I take from this passage, this warning from Jesus, is the fact that if our eyes are not made whole, meaning if we are not born again and given new eyes and the scales taken off of our eyes, we are in absolute darkness. And in fact, this word darkness here is the same word that God talks about in Matthew chapter 25. Let's go to Matthew 25, and in verse 30, Christ gave this warning. And cast ye the unprofitable servant into outer darkness. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So, what am I saying here? The first death brought absolute spiritual darkness. So that from a spiritual standpoint, we absolutely died. We died, so we have no spiritual understanding. That is terrible. That is a terrible thing for us to be spiritually dead, which means we have no understanding of God. We have no connection with Him. God is only keeping us alive. We only have the breath of life, but our souls have been darkened. And then so that's the first death. And this is what is the terrible aspect of the first death, and what we need to recognize, and why we cannot come to God, why we will not come to God, why we cannot seek Him, why we will not seek Him, is simply because we are spiritually dead. Our spiritual nature, the part in which the only part that can communicate with God, has been destroyed, has been darkened. And so now we are as though we are dead men walking on the earth and through the wilderness, through the valley of the shadow of death, every human being, and yet we don't realize it. We don't, because our hearts deceive us so badly, and that we are in such absolute darkness, we aren't even aware of the situation. We're not even aware of how terrible our situation is. And we would be more than happy to go on in our blindness because we love darkness. Unsaved man loves darkness and loves sin. We are in bondage to it. We love death. All right. If things weren't bad enough for us, there is the second death. And this is the final part. The second death is final. And God speaks of this in Revelation. And let me just turn to that. In Revelation 20, let's go to Revelation chapter 20 in verse 11. And I saw a great white throne, and him that sat on it, from whose face the earth and the heaven fled away, and there was found no place for them. And I saw the dead, small and great, stand before God, and the books were opened. And this, I want to just stop here for a second. This were opened, these verbs here, should not necessarily be translated the way that they were translated. They could also be translated had been opened. So another book had been opened, or in the books had been opened, or were, or already had been. And let me just keep going here, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged, or had been judged, out of those things which had been written in the books. And that's the way that they translated this. I don't want to get off on this right now, but I do think that our proper understanding of the verb tenses in this portion are very difficult to understand. But yet, we look at this as being a future event. But just for now, just for the sake of now, let's just keep it as it has been written here in the King James. And I saw the dead, small and great, stand before God, and the books were opened, and another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged out of those things which were written in the books according to their works. And the sea gave up the dead, which were in it. And death and hell delivered up the dead, which were in them. And they were judged, every man according to their works. And death and hell were cast into the lake of fire. This is the second death. And whosoever was not found written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire. Notice verse 14 here. And death and hell were cast into the lake of fire. This is the second death. The word hell could also be the word Hades. The word Hades can also mean grave, the grave. And so those that died the first death are in the grave. And then to make things more complicated, God says these words in John chapter 3. Let's read John 3, verse 18. He that believeth on him is not condemned, but he that believeth not is condemned already, because he hath not believed in the name of the only begotten Son of God. Those that do not believe in Jesus Christ, those who are not named in the Lamb's book of life, are condemned. And then if you go down to verse 36 of John 3, he that believeth on the Son hath everlasting life, and he that believeth not the Son shall not see life, but the wrath of God abideth on him. So the wrath of God is already abiding on those who have died the first death. And then in Revelation, going back to Revelation 20, in verse 14, and death and hell were cast into the lake of fire. This is the second death. And whosoever was not found written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire. Unquenchable fire. Now, is this a physical fire? God isn't necessarily saying that this is an absolute fire or this is a physical fire. We have to remember in Mark 4, what we read in Mark 4, verse 34, but without a parable spake he not unto them, and when they were alone, he expounded all things unto his disciples. God spoke everything as in parables. The Bible is spiritual, parabolic. And if we remember in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, that the gospel is foolishness to those that are perishing. So the gospel itself can only be spiritually discerned. And so this gets back to the whole problem that we face, that the first death has brought upon mankind. But we need to continue to talk about these things, and I want to continue to talk about eternal judgment. I know this is it's very uncomfortable, but yet this is something that we should embrace, and we should seek to understand. So until next time, we'll pick this up. But until next time, may the Lord richly bless you.
You've been listening to Issues and Answers with your host, Family Radio President and General Manager Tom Evans. This program is designed to address issues facing family radio as well as to answer
come to the garden alone, where the dew still on the roses, and the voice I hear falling on my ear, the Son of God discloses. He speaks, and the sound of his voice is so sweet that the birds hush their singing, and the melody that he gave to me within my heart is ringing. And he talks with me, and he tells me I am his own, and the joy we share as we tarry there, none other has ever known. I'd stay in the garden with him, though the night all around me be falling, but he bids me go through the voice of law. His voice to me is calling. And he walks with me, and he talks with me, and he tells me I am his own, and the joy we share as we turn